Basically, they say that the coach and coach's experience does not matter. So I become a nobody when I'm coaching you. Doesn't matter what previous personal experiences or business experiences I might have had. I'm not bringing any of that to the table. So that's kind of like the very clinical definition of coaching, which I believe really doesn't work in the executive coaching space.
Marina, welcome to the Oxford Talks podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. For those of us who don't know, what do you do?
I'm an executive coach for CEOs and top teams. And I like to say that I help good leaders become great. And one of the areas that has been a big focus of mine lately is the topic of executive positioning and visibility. So,
Amazing. So you are in the world of executive, more or less coaches, strategic advisors. How do you get involved in this in the first place?
Oh, it's a great question. So my background is, I would say, not a typical coaching background. So typically, people who end up in the coaching space have studied psychology or something of that sort. I have a business background and quite a heavy business background. I've actually been in business and finance for over a decade. I started finance and banking. I did all the things, and at some point, it just hit me that it's all about the leadership at the end of the day, where kind of things either happen or they don't. And so I decided to focus solely on that basically side of the business. And I found that unfortunately, actually, in order to do this effectively, you have to step outside of the organizations and be an outsider. I do wish for a world where, we would have this kind of support and this type of intervention from inside of the organizations, but that is today still a very rare occasion. There's very few organizations out there who have a very strategic human resource function and leadership development function and so on. So that was my journey. I started in corporate world and at some point stepped outside and started coaching and advising CEOs from the outside.
Marina, I would love to get your perspective on one thing that, especially you work very closely with the executive teams. How do you prepare them to kind of fight corporate inertia? And by that, I mean that when companies have been running for 15, 20, 25 years, they have a way of doing things.
Yeah.
And, and being in business, you can totally sort of vouch for that. Change is just a constant theme in a business world. How do you prepare leaders to fight that kind of corporate inertia?
So it's an interesting question because I would say the most obvious way that they actually start to fight the inertia is if they've engaged me, that is already a big step and a big signal because they're basically saying we need to continue moving and continue evolving. And look at us, we're at the top. We kind of made it. And still we continue growing, right? Because we know that in order to grow this organization, we need to continue growing as leaders and serving differently. And so that is obviously a big signal. And I think, I do believe that the culture starts at the top, which is why I'm so passionate about doing this work, because, if I do my work right, the ripple effect of that is massive, right? And is felt across the organization. And so, for example, when I work with the leadership team, with the executive team, I do not accept the engagement unless the CEO is willing to be coached one-on-one by me as well. Because I think that role modeling is so, so important, right? And her or him accepting that is a big signal to say, hey, I'm not just bringing someone in to help my team. I actually know I need help as well, right? And I will need to evolve as well. And so I think that kind of role modeling from the top plays a big role in terms of sending that signal out that, hey, actually change is the only constant and we need to start embracing that mindset. And we are the first ones to role model that.
Amazing. And do you, in your sort of work, do you feel that is the case that you get appointed by the board of directors to work with the CEO, or the CEOs are more likely to I've made my decision. I'm gonna move in that direction. Let's get help, and they reach out to you. What's more happening?
Yeah, so I would say the dream scenario and my usual scenario is when CEOs reach out and they say, "Hey, we're actually doing fine, but I know we could do even better, and we're looking to move to this next step, next stage of growth, or overcome this challenge in our business, and I know we can accelerate that progress, right?
Yeah.
And I know that we need to grow as leaders before we can actually achieve this in our business, but we don't quite know how or where to start and all of that." And so um, when it's externally kind of seeked and appointed by the board or even by the human resource function, it's something I'm really, really cautious about. Because again, I can be the best coach in the world, but I can only have results if the person I'm coaching or the team I'm coaching is fully bought into the process and feels that urgency, right? And
Yeah.
is really wants to work and change. And when it comes from the outside, that is rarely the case.
But how do you create that trust with them? That's the hardest part, isn't it?
It's the hardest part, right? I mean, it's kind of, that the beginning and the foundation of a coaching journey is building that true like alliance with the client, and making them feel and understand that you're truly there just for them, and their success is your success. You don't have any other agenda in the world. And once they start to feel that, they start to kind of lean in, and this idea of having someone by their side starts to feel really good, right? And they start to feel more safe, and also less lonely, right? Because, we've all heard it, and it's true, unfortunately, it gets really lonely at the top. I mean, especially for the CEOs, because they rarely have anyone they can actually share everything with.
Hmm.
And so I think, they are actually craving for that. And so then the trust building is obviously my task in like making sure that, that I'm creating that safe space. But it's obviously also, the code of conduct and ethics of the industry, right? It's
Yeah.
like, I'm making them believe that, of course, everything that happens is highly confidential and won't be compromised at any point, right? But it's a good point. It's a really important element of the journey, and if trust is not established, nothing can actually succeed.
Yeah.
Because I do need to have access into everything that is happening and understand everything that is happening that to truly help, right? If I'm only getting a partial view, I can never really be as effective as advisor and as a coach. And so that's why the engagements are usually long-term engagements. It's not like, oh, I come in and I do a session or two and that's it, because it takes time to build that trust. It takes time to really understand where someone is coming from, and for them to also try, start to feel comfortable with me. And so we
Yeah.
need to give that some time, right? That human connection is important.
Can you tell me about a time when you had to work with someone and there was just no synergy between you and
Mm.
them whatsoever, without, of course, naming them? How did you navigate that? That of course you are there. It has been the task needs to be done, but in your mind you're thinking, "Oh my God, this is gonna be a hell of a ride working with this person."
So it kind of goes like this, right? So like maybe I'm asked to work with someone, or someone comes and says, "Hey, I think it would be a really great idea for you to come coach this president," right? So occasionally it would happen that I'm working with the CEO, but the CEO maybe, wants me to come and coach a president of a division or a big region or something like that. And so, we start with openness, but it's never really a yes until I've actually had a conversation. I had a chance to have that sort of some people call it a chemistry call, right? It's like that kind of introduction, to really understand, hey, does this person really want to be coached? Do they really want to do this? Do they see what's in it for them? Or are they just trying to do it to tick the box and make their boss, feel good, right? And so So that's kind of like the assessment that is on me. And I would say for the most part, luckily I do this part right. And so if I don't feel like that bind is fully there, then what would happen is I would be honest and I would share that. I would say, hey, listen, I don't think this is the right step for you at this point in your journey. It seems like your priorities are elsewhere. And I would share that back with the CEO. Now, it's obviously a message that doesn't land very well,
Mm.
but I think it's one that really needs to be heard, right? Of like, well, you want this person to grow, but this person is not really willing to do the work right
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
And so it's not going to work.
So it's kind of your call to do it, or they sometimes figure it out themselves. And
Yeah, I mean, I do my part, and then of course, if they have this introduction with me, and I feel like it would be great to work together, but they walk away and they think like, oh, I'm not actually vibing with
yeah,
Marina. They're welcome, and I make it safe and okay to also express that. But it rarely happens. It's kind of like a mutual chemistry,
yeah,
right? So if
yeah,
you feel good with someone, it's highly likely they feel good with you. It's more that me as an expert, I know what it takes to make this a successful relationship because I've done it many times before. And so I see that part of the equation on me to actually say, hey, do we have the basic ingredients here? Or if we don't, then let's just be honest right now. And it doesn't mean it's a no forever. It just means it's maybe not now, right?
yeah. Marina, can you, in the world of executive sort of coaching, when you see the word coach, and I think the profession of coaching, like being a teacher, so goes by a very different name
Yeah.
across industries. But when you look at, let's say, professional sports, you look at coaches of like golf or like football or cricket or anything like that. They go through these very specific kind of performance driven trainings
Mm-hmm.
that either they had been some players themselves and then they have sort of become coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And in the business world, is there such a sort of or do you think the coaching or the education happen is kind of literature driven coaching, and like this is the use case and case based studies, or there is more to do with like I have been in the industry for 25 years and I've seen a lot of it and I can coach someone? What is more prevalent, and what category do you sort of fit into?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I would say coaching industry in general, if we were to look at the International Coaching Federation, which is the main governing body and all of that, basically they say that the coach and coach's experience does not matter. So I become a nobody when I'm coaching you. Doesn't matter what previous personal experiences or business experiences I might have had. I'm not bringing any of that to the table. So that's kind of like the very clinical definition of coaching, which I believe really doesn't work in the executive coaching space, right? Because you're working with very senior leaders and they want to know what do you think, right? It's like they want to they really like to hear that, hey, you've been through, maybe you haven't been through exactly the same experience, that doesn't matter so much, but for you to really be able to understand where they're coming from and what they're going through, it is helpful if you've been exposed to a similar kind of environment, right? And so I am, we basically, I like to say that, you have on one end of the spectrum is sort of the clinical coaching, right? It's like the sort of the clean definition of coaching, which is like, I only ask questions. I never offer my opinion. I never give guidance, sort of. And then you have the advisory and consulting space on the other end, which is kind of like the McKinseys and PwCs that come and design all the solutions for you and all of that.
And charge quite a lot of money.
And of course, charge a lot of money. And so, and I would say, I am in between. So I love leveraging the tools and the skills from the coaching world because I think it's really, the bridge that is missing in a lot of consulting work is like where we develop solutions, but we don't quite acknowledge fully the human element and where they are on the maturity journey. But I also bring all of my business background and my also experience of having coached other executives and CEOs. I bring all of that to the table, right? So I might ask you and try to understand what you're trying to achieve, but then I might, offer suggestions and say, hey, what I've seen other clients do, what works, here's some options. Have you thought about this? Or, and it's always on you to then choose your way forward, right? There's never a single way forward, which is where the coaching element comes in, and I can help you navigate between the options. But I'm bringing a bit more substance into the conversation rather than just working with your substance, which is the traditional coaching. So I'm in the middle, I would say.
That's really amazing. And I was thinking, as I was listening to you, I was thinking that earlier this month, we talked about the Oxford. You have done an Oxford talk with us, and that's really amazing. And we talked about the spotlight and how leaders need to step into that. Where did you get that idea from? Would you like to share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been, first of all, great pleasure to do the Oxford talk with you. And I really appreciated the opportunity. And, when you've asked me to do it and you asked me what I wanted to talk about, it was so clear to me what I wanted to talk about. It was like one single topic. This is what's top of mind. And the reason why that has been top of mind is like, it has actually emerged from my coaching work over the past few years, right? And so I realized, when I first talked to executives or CEOs and I asked them, hey, how are you doing? And I would kind of like test and probe on different aspects of leadership. And for the most part, they're doing okay-ish on everything because they've already gotten some leadership training or coaching before and some kind of support. So they've already worked on that. But when I asked the topic of, when I asked the question around how strategic are you about your positioning internally and externally, how do you feel about, your strategic visibility and influence? How do you feel about your leadership beyond this organization? Like, are you being the leader of the industry and the ecosystem and not just the leader of your organization? That is the question where, 95% of the time, the answer is like, oof, I need help with that.
Yeah.
No, I'm nowhere close to where I want to be. It just never gets to be a priority. It always gets deprioritized, and it's something I don't feel good about at all, right, with where I'm at right now. And so that to me is a clear signal that, that is a space where a lot of support is needed. And then we look at what's happening sort of in the market, right? We're looking at, the evolution. I'm not a marketing or a communication expert whatsoever, but you don't need to be an expert to see that none of us are really buying based on perfectly polished websites and brochures anymore, right?
Yeah.
What do? We go on Instagram, we check user content, we go on LinkedIn, we check out the CEO, we want to see what they're commenting, what they're writing about. Maybe we go even deeper in the organization to kind of really understand, like, who are these people? Who's behind this brand, all right? And so, and I think that trend is not going to stop, right? It's like we're seeing that sort of, some people call it the humanization of marketing and communication. That is, more and more organizations are seeing like, actually, we need this. Without, putting the humans and the leaders in the front, we're not actually able to get the kind of engagement we used to get, right? It's like we're just not responding anymore. The oversaturation content and all of that. And like now with AI, everything can be perfectly produced and perfectly polished, but it doesn't really do anything anymore, right? And so this is where the human element becomes essential. But then, I'm working with all these executives who are just so focused and 150% consumed by delivering the results. And I'm like, well, we need to look at the asset allocation of your time and reallocate some of that into actually strategically communicating it internally and externally. Like, that would actually skyrocket your results.
Yeah.
Right?
Marina, I want to jump into sort of the personal side of it, that you working with someone, I can totally assume it's a company of 100, 150 people and the executive team is really concerned about how they get, how the people see them. And it's a lot of people. And working with them, do you think that it exhausts kind of sort of personal headspace of yours as well, in a sense that if you really go very deep into the weeds, it seems almost like you are kind of running the company as
Mm,
well, as long as with them.
mm.
And for you, for your work, imagine you're working with, let's say minimum of 3 people at a given time. To me, I run 3 companies, and that seems like, there should be a 48 hours in one day.
Yeah.
How does it personally kind of mentally exhaust you, because you have to look at things strategically,
Yeah.
but then when you're really deep down under, it's hard to sort of jump out of that and move on to the next conversation.
Yeah.
So how do you manage that, and how does it work for you?
So it's a great question. First, I want to come back to the topic of size because I do think it's important. My experience is that CEOs and leadership teams they're not able to care about this enough unless they've reached a scale of like 1,000 people and plus. I have few clients, but they're quite, I would say, an exception to the rule, right? Who are below that, who do this work. But I would say most likely, the average, average organization and average leadership team has much bigger headaches at that stage of scaling, right? And so I would say, you usually start to worry about culture, strategic positioning internally and externally somewhere at the 500 people to 1,000 people mark. Again, depends on the industry, depends on your, niche and all of that. But, as a rule of thumb, right? Now, your question is a really relevant question because you're right. I do go quite deep because, again, it's not just coaching, right? So I kind of blend between coaching and advisory. And for that, I actually really care. I want to understand the business. And I come with a very I'm very result oriented, which again is very anti-coaching because they say coaches should not be attached to a result. I'm very attached to a result. But I think that's why my clients love me, right?
Results as in numbers, or results and, well, I'll come back to that question in a minute. Like, what exactly
Yeah,
results are you?
exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe it will become clear as I kind of elaborate a bit more, but I'm very sort of result oriented. What I mean by that is like, I don't ever want the leadership conversation to be this kind of like very idealistic conversation in vacuum of like, oh, Valid, let's talk about what kind of a leader should you be? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? No, I would want to understand where are your 3 companies at versus where do you want to take them? And then we will talk about how you need to evolve as a leader in order to be able to take them, fastest way possible, right? And so leadership is always relative to where you're trying to take the business. And I like to say that there is no single definition in my mind, right? It's like, this
Yeah.
is my philosophy, that there is no single definition of what good leadership looks like. It really depends on where you're at. So the kind of leadership that will serve you and that is good leadership for you right now, given where you're trying to go with your work and your business, is very different than someone else, right? And so, and even I've sometimes coached leaders through transitions. And, what was great leadership at this stage of the journey and made them really successful and was essential becomes an obstacle at the next phase, right? Because maybe they moved to a different region. Maybe now they're running a different kind of a business. Maybe they've moved to a different organization that has a different culture and therefore has different challenges and gaps that they as a leader with their leadership style need to compensate for, right? And so all of that needs to be taken into account,
Yeah.
right? And so back to, sorry, it's a bit of a long answer to your question, but yes, I get very involved and it does take exhaust my headspace, absolutely. Which is why I only work with very few clients at the time, right? I work with a few clients, but over a long period of time. The beauty of that is then I get to know them really well.
Yeah.
So over time, it's less and less headspace, because I actually already know the business. And unlike you, right, I'm not a serial entrepreneur yet. So for me, at least, the topic across multiple clients is very similar.
Okay.
So like when you're pivoting between clients, it's still the same topic. Yes, this client is maybe on a different stage of the journey, but that does impact
Yes, it
the
does.
amount of headspace you need and brain power you need to actually switch, right? And so, but my solution to that was basically, going for more longer term engagements that really are more of a strategic partnerships where, it's entirely trust based. I know my clients trust me. They let me just do my stuff and they believe I know
Yes.
what I'm doing. And so I don't really, that actually saves the brain power because you don't need to worry about any of those
Yes.
elements and you're just there to do the work and make an impact and you have full freedom to do that.
Rita, you have mentioned leadership quite a few times just now. I want to ask, let me spare you the feeling of asking you what leadership is because
Yeah.
there's so many definitions
Yeah.
to it. I actually want to ask you, how can we trust our leaders?
Wow, that's a big question. So how we can trust them is my answer to that, and it's definitely not the exclusive, exhaustive answer to that, but my answer to that is like we can trust them more if they lift the curtain a little bit more and show us the behind the scenes, right? And you've heard me talk about this quite a bit
Yes.
already, and so I really believe that it's hard to trust the leaders who show up only for the showtime, right? Who show up only for the town halls and the perfectly polished kind of, I don't know, email updates or newsletters or, investor kind of calls and stuff like that. Like we need to have more of those authentic, raw insights in between, right? We need more of those touch points where we feel like actually they're just lifting the curtain and they're showing us more of what's actually really happening behind the scenes. And so to make this a little bit more specific is, right now we're going through times of big changes, right? And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And so a lot of the clients that I'm working with, they're going through some massive shifts, right? Either reorgs or, big transformations. There's a lot happening. And so sometimes the mistake that leaders make, including the CEOs, is they're in the middle of a big shift. Let's say they're trying to figure out all the changes they need to make in order to be future ready and to adjust for the, market shifts adequately and all of that. And while they're figuring all of that out, basically they put the curtain down and they're behind the scenes with their leadership team figuring all of this out, right? And so now what happens is you just disconnected the rest of the organization. You disconnected the outside world. They have no idea, you guys are working on this. And that creates mistrust, right? What happens is you basically create a void and people start to fill that void, which is a very natural thing, with their own interpretation of what is really happening, right? And so that's when you start to get sort of the noise and the rumors and the anxiety and uncertainty, what's going to happen with our positions, what's going to happen with our locations, with our offices, stuff like that. And so, and why leaders do that is they're like, but we don't have the perfect solution yet. We're still figuring it out. How are we going to communicate? We haven't decided yet, we still need more time. We need more data. We need all of that. And so my advice is always like, that's fine, but what can you communicate, And even if it's just to say, hey guys, I know you're really anxious to hear the updates. We're working really hard to get this update to you as soon as possible. Even that is better than nothing, right? Second thing that you can always do, even if you don't have any idea of like what the future is going to look like, you can, for example, communicate your values and principles, right? You can say, hey guys, I cannot tell you what the future is going to look like, but I can tell you the values that me and the leadership team will honor as we're working through all of these different options.
I very much love that. That making a promise that you will honor in future, because you never know how it's going to bring to you.
No, and even if you come up with a solution, you might need to change it actually 2 weeks after because something else happens, right? So you don't attach to the solution, but you can attach and commit to the values and the principles. And when people actually buy into your commitment to values and principles, they're going to trust you. They're not actually going to care so much about how the solution looks like.
Marina, the world is going through a very turbulent time at the moment. There is, I cannot even pinpoint like a region or a country anymore, but it feels like everywhere you see this kind of like a global shift going on. And leadership has been questioned a lot. Leadership
Mm.
has been in the spotlight a lot. All sorts of leaders are in there. How do you think that what kind of leadership the world needs right now? What are the as you mentioned, I was just
Mm.
saying to you just now that a reorg might be going on, and there's a different leadership that's needed right there and then location, time, subject changes, and they're not relevant anymore. What qualities do we need in leaders today?
Yeah, I think it's that nimbleness, right? To understand that, to continuously adjust, right? And so, we can call it situational leadership, we can call it leadership adaptability or agility. There's many ways, but I think nimbleness is really like, and humbleness, I guess, is the starting point. I think that is really, really essential. Not attaching to, sometimes we will hear leaders say, but that's not my style. This is the
Mm.
kind of leader I am, and so, you know, anything is your style. If that's what your people need and what your organization
It's kind
needs.
of like letting the ego go
Yeah,
away. Yeah.
letting the ego go. And it doesn't mean you need to let go of your essence, right?
Mm.
Again, coming back to the values and principles, you can still very much honor the core values that you have. But it just means that it's going to look and feel a little different depending on what you're going through. So that sort of nimbleness and really, for lack of a better term, growth mindset that really never stops, to say in every single moment, continuing to challenge yourself of like, how am I being the obstacle here?
Yeah.
Because we always are,
Yes, we
in some
always
shape
are.
or form. And especially as leaders, if we can bring that kind of a mindset to work, I mean, that is powerful role modeling for our teams, right? And now we're starting to foster an organization that embraces that as part of the culture. I mean, you become unstoppable. Imagine if every single employee came to work and said, how do I need to approach this differently today to drive a better outcome? Wow, you would be truly unstoppable, right?
That's very true. Marina, where do you see yourself and your work in 10 years? What kind of big change you want to see in the world and in you, perhaps?
Mm. Wow. Let me think about that one for a second. Where do I see my work? So, I get the question sometimes that is sort of similar to that. Like, am I worried with the AI? And, how is that going to impact maybe the coaching industry? And I don't, maybe you can call me ignorant. I don't see a risk of that happening anytime soon, right? Because I think that personal element of like, first of all, my personality, my values, but then also all of my experiences, that I bring to the table are impossible to replicate at this point in time. And so I do feel like, and I feel like people will continue to crave more and more those kind of high touch experiences where they actually have a human by their side who is able to to kind of honor all the nuances of their experience, which I think in a more sort of like digitalized world becomes harder, right? And so I think the kind of clients I work with and the work that I do will remain the same. In fact, I expect it to actually be more in demand because I think we'll actually crave that human connection more. And then the second part of my work, which we talked about in the Oxford talk and a little bit before, about the work that really focuses exclusively on the executive positioning and visibility, and really helping organizations to put their mission in the spotlight by putting their leaders in the spotlight. I think that will actually exponentially grow. Again, because of that human element, I
Yes.
think the human element will become so rare and so exclusive in the future, and we'll just be forced to leverage it more when we have it, right? And so I think for companies not to tap into that is still somewhat optional today. It won't be optional anymore. I think it will become a must. They will need to tap into that resource in order to, to continue to build trust and be relatable.
Marina, speaking of human element, you just mentioned, we have this tradition in the podcast that every guest who comes, we ask them what has been that one book that has really profoundly affected their life. And we would love to give this book to any audience member anywhere in the world, physical, PDFs, whatever it is. And we would love to create that human connection with you and the audience members. So could you kindly let us know what is that one book that has profoundly changed your life?
Without a doubt, it is Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza. That's my number one. And then there's probably 9 empty spaces, and then it's the rest. That's it. Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself is, I've been craving for like a way, like I felt this very strongly, this need to evolve into the next version of me at some point in my life. That was probably about 6-7 years ago. But I just didn't know how. How do we do this? How do we break through? I'm not talking about evolving. I'm not talking about improving 5-10%. I'm talking about, I feel like I want to leave all that I am behind and just choose this 2.0 version of me, or a 10.0 version of me, which I believe is in me, but I don't know how to tap into that, right? And I do truly believe we all have it in us, but we don't always have the tools to how to access it, right? And so for me, reading that book gave me really the tools and the techniques of like, how do you actually abandon your old self and step into your new self, which has been really transformational for myself and also some of my loved ones who been on a similar journey. And so I'm a big fan of Dr. Joe's work and all of that. But that book specifically is definitely my
It's
number
like
one.
break the cocoon and become the butterfly, like transform.
Yes.
That's really amazing. Marina, for people who want to connect with you, what's the best way to reach out to you?
LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active. I post a lot. If you want to learn more about my work, LinkedIn is the best place. I also publish regularly, on Forbes and Fast Company. But LinkedIn is a great content hub. That is being reshared there. So you can find all of that on my personal page.
Marina, thank you so much for being on the pod. It was a pleasure to be in conversation with you.
Great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Marina. It was brilliant. Thank you so much. It was great.
Thank you.
What do you think?